great, thank you, honor and excitement that we introduce our opening keynote, Chef Nephi Craig. Chef Craig is an internationally recognized leader of Indigenous food sovereignty and education. He's an enrolled member of the White Mountain Apache tribe and is half Navajo. He's also the founder of the Native American Culinary Association, or NACA, an organization that is dedicated to research, refinement, and development of Native American cuisine. In 2023, Chef Craig was a James Beard Foundation nominee for Best Chef Southwest. In addition, Chef Craig was featured in the James Beard award-winning film Gather, a documentary on Indigenous food sovereignty. Lastly, Chef Craig is an advanced certified relapse prevention specialist and a behavioral health technician, serving as the nutritional recovery program coordinator at the Rainbow Treatment Center and is the executive chef of Cafe Gohu. You'll have to correct me for mispronouncing that. I'm sure I did. I apologize. On the White Mountain Apache tribe in Arizona. I am going to turn it over to you, Chef Craig.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Well, good morning. My name is Nephi Craig. I'm very pleased to be here with you all this morning for this opening keynote session. As the introduction stated, I'm White Mountain Apache and Navajo on my late father's side. I'm coming to you from the White Mountain Apache tribe in northeastern Arizona. My presentation today is a combination of a lot of things. And to help situate my perspective, I speak a number of languages, so to speak. I began cooking in 1998, so I've had a long track record of cooking, so it's 26 years now. I went into a cooking school wanting to study classical French. I thought it would be like any other discipline where you would be able to train and learn and go and travel and do things like that. I heard when I was in cooking school, I noticed right away that there was little to no mention of Native American cuisine. People weren't even saying Native American cuisine. So to me, as a young kid, I wanted to do something different. I had heard chefs in the schools say the word master, like master chef, right? And I also, the only other place I had heard that word being used was like master carpenter, master painter, master dancer, and kung fu master. So like, I was like, yeah, that's cool. So I guess this is something you give your life to. And as an 18-year-old kid, I decided, okay, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. A very kind of young and naive decision, but in the long run, I've stuck with it. And it's something that I very much love, something that I love to offer and teach. And my perspective on teaching is to help open pathways to allow food to bring us together. My journey would take me all over the world. I would cook in London, I would cook in Germany, I would cook in Japan, I would cook in Brazil. And recently, in the past couple of years, I've finally been able to go north and south to Canada and Mexico. But my journey started out in a way that I wanted to study classical cuisine so I could be a chef, right? I could do quote unquote fancy cooking, run a restaurant, and do all those things. But as I got deeper into the work, like I said, when I first got into cooking school, there was no mention. And I would ask my chefs, hey, chef, is there such thing as a Native American cuisine? And my big, tall, European chef guy with his tall hat, he would say, I know you make fry bread. I know you boil stew. And to me, that was a dismissive comment or a dismissive response. So I got the message that it was less, quote, less than and shouldn't be talked about. What I didn't know then that I know now is that as a person from the White Mountain Apache tribe and the Navajo Nation, growing up in our communities the way we grow up, I had just been around food. I had been absorbing messages about how my grandmother would cook, how my mom would cook, seeing food in ceremony, seeing food in our creation stories, seeing food in our art. Just about every aspect of who we are as Indigenous peoples, food was present in some form or fashion. So when I got into cooking school, I didn't know that I had a supplemental culinary education. And it would take me some time to unravel and weave a new narrative, so to speak, around native foods. And so now 25, 20, 26 years into this journey, I really feel that native foods have changed the world. Native foods have a really distinct power. And when we follow indigenous cultivars, we are confronted by many truths. And I always say indigenous foods and indigenous cultivars are carriers of memory and carriers of truth. So as we get into the cooking demonstration, I'll talk about ingredients, I'll talk about techniques, but the main core part of this is that my work led me on a journey as a member of a quote unquote marginalized group from a traumatized population. I grew up on the White Mountain Apache tribe with drugs and alcohol all around me, and I thought it was normal. And so by the time I was a teenager, I was already abusing substances and using. So my story includes addiction, alcoholism, and recovery. So all the while in the background of my professional life, there was the struggle with addiction. And it's a topic that not many people want to talk about, especially in the restaurant field or the industry. But it's something that I've decided to go take head on. I feel that indigenous foods are one of the key components to our recovery, not just from drugs and alcohol, but from intergenerational trauma, incarceration, public health disparities, a number of different things. We can apply indigenous foodways to our remedies. And especially when we're reaching the population that we deal with, from youth to families to fathers, the indigenous food practices require us to use all ages of our population, from the youth to the kids in middle school to high school kids to college students and beyond. And it's not only just the professional sector, but it's also the community member outliers where there's this wealth of knowledge and information. So my journey would take me around the world. I would do a lot of fine dining training and working, become very disciplined, and realize that as a young White Mountain Apache community member and Navajo Nation community member, that I really gravitated toward the chaos, so to speak. And with time, I've been able to find peace and comfort in the chaos. So my story now today, I do work at a place called Cafe Gojo. It is inside the nutritional recovery program inside the Rainbow Treatment Center, which is my community's drug and alcohol counseling treatment center. So my path by following native foods has kind of caused me to evolve out of just being a standard industry chef and using my experience internationally in professional cooking and also my study of native foods to to kind of distill all of those experiences and create and vision cast the nutritional recovery program. And so now I really feel like using my sobriety, my sobriety date is June 11th, 2000, June 10th, 2011. So I'm 13 years into this journey of recovery. The population I deal with in my community are adults in early recovery phases, but our outreach programs meet all demographics. So we do a lot of outside work in farms. We do a lot of home cooking classes. The structure of my um, presentation, I hope that I teach in a way that lets you say, hey, that's cool. I could do that. Or hey, I could do that better. Because I want to avoid creating barriers in food. Because I know when I first got into professional cooking, this work seemed very mystical and like there had to be some secret to it. But I always tell people that recovery and cooking are very common sense. They just require a willingness, a desire, and a sense of humility to be able to follow instructions that by someone that's been there before. So themes like that we weave together. And so I've become a behavioral health technician. I run therapeutic groups like this that are psychoeducational. I do group therapy sessions, and Cafe Gojo is also a vocational training site where we can allow people of different stages in recovery get hands-on with food, because a major component of relapse prevention and the path to wellness is by building skills, not just technical skills with tools, but also our psychological, emotional, and spiritual skills. I feel like the emotional skills kind of get left out of the equation sometimes, So I really encourage people to season their food with humor, season their food with care, and have a real intense sense of enthusiasm. So I've also become an advanced certified relapse prevention specialist with the Synapse Gorski Corporation. And so we do relapse prevention work on a regular basis through food. I really feel that food is the guide that disarms people. Food and cooking is the guide that allows us to find the truth. And I always like to say it's edible education. So that's kind of my situating your perspective. I speak the language of public health. I speak the language of behavioral health, addiction recovery, a lot of resurgent culture, resistance culture language. So when you go through the presentation with me, look at it like kind of an expanding heart, right? It's breathing. It's reaching into the past. It's reaching to the future, but it's doing our best to always stay grounded. And as we run through the presentation, I hope that you can put yourself inside of the presentation, think of the population you're working with, think of your own family, and find creative ways to get the work done. Because the work that we do is life-saving, it's life-changing, and we must continue it by any means possible. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. We'll do some Q&A answers at the end, but I'm going to run through this presentation here with you all, and I will share my screen and let's do this. Where are you? Where'd you go? Okay, right there. So I'm gonna close this guy up. Okay, so my presentation is called Indigenous Foodways as Community Intervention. I feel like when you work with food and you work with farming and different things like that, it's we're very close to the solution. In the work that we do, we can also get close to the problem, but we can also be very close to the solution and not even know it. So I hope that this presentation, community as a community intervention, families in focus, can allow us to think creatively and to consider ways and modalities that we can integrate into our work as we reach the population we're trying to reach. So I put down at the bottom here, behavioral activation of indigeneity. And behavioral activation is one of my favorite terms and tools because, for example, if you were here in person in this cooking class, my verbal message would be important, but the behavioral activation of you picking up a knife and working and cooking or tasting and smelling, something wakes you up in the process of behaving, cooking. Memories, thoughts, recipes, things come flooding back. People, places, and things. So behavioral activation is one of our favorite tools. So let me see, where are you? Okay, so how this works, I look at this as a fluid framework. Because us as practitioners in all of the work that we do, we have to navigate and operate outside of colonial structures, hospitality industry norms, therapy culture for bio, psycho, spiritual change, and community mobilization. We are the ones that are in the field. We are the ones that see the tears. We are the ones that encounter the disparities. So this session illustrates how ethnopoetry is leveraged as a fluid framework for social recovery, wellness, and challenging colonial paradigms. Many of the population, it's not just indigenous populations, but also marginalized groups, because colonialism, as we'll discuss, has these side effects and these branches or these tentacles that reach out. So that term ethnopoetry, if you haven't heard it before, it's a anthropological term where it's kind of like ethnopoetry or something that is ethnopoetic does not need to be categorized. It can't be categorized. It can't be labeled. It's not defined. It's kind of fluid, but it needs to be experienced. So this is kind of an ethnopoetic approach to health and wellness by using food and skill building. So this is designed for indigenous communities, families, single parents, caregivers, community members, indigenous youth and elders. It's designed with us in mind because we live in a society and a reality that's saturated with trauma, violence, and sugar. And we see this up at the forefront we see usually the physical manifestations of these legacies that we've inherited. So through a lens of trauma-informed care, this session takes a look at the connection between trauma, violence, and food choices among marginalized populations, while presenting indigenous food, menu engineering, and land-based activities as intervention methods. I'll illustrate how land back is also access to care for indigenous populations. So if you have heard that term, land back, we usually associate it with hashtags and spray painted walls and front lining movements, gas masks, right? That's all very legitimate because the need for land back is vital for indigenous populations across the Americas. But beyond that, thinking beyond the kind of romantic, attractive nation of land back and the resistance movements, there's also the importance of remembering that land, when we have land back, we have access to care as indigenous peoples. We have access to land, to water, to the sky, to place names, to places that informed our complete identity. So now when you see the term land back, use it and leverage it as a tool to say this is also access to care. Because the monster that we're up against, the battle that we're fighting is against colonialism. And like this image shows here, colonialism is a shapeshifter. It's woven into the fabric of everything that we do, even from therapy culture to modalities we employ to education, law, medicine. So we have to walk the line, walk a fine line, and use our intuition, our heart, and our ethics when we're developing modalities and working with our population. So that picture is kind of to show this is like an old school shapeshifter in Native communities, but to remind us that colonialism is something we must be very, very aware of so we can navigate around it. Because trauma, as we experience it, as indigenous peoples, we perceive trauma as an ever-present obstacle, which hinders emotional, intellectual, and spiritual development. Trauma as an obstacle hinders food knowledge, nutritional decision-making patterns, thus impacting physical health. Trauma as a barrier to health contributes to disease, addiction, substance use disorder, and many forms of violence. So think of the communities we try to reach, the population, the demographic, the youth, the families, the caregivers, the elders. When you open up the refrigerator, what do we see? Do we see vegetables that are fresh and healthy? Is there a barrier because of poverty, which is also another layer of colonial violence? Do we see families saying, no, natives don't eat like that? That's white people food. That's internalized oppression. Do we see how we've passed on food traditions and have been forced to accept certain foods and not question them? And just because we've learned through the generations that when we question our food choices, we can often get in trouble or lose our resources. So trauma, as we experience it, is not just a physical act. And so really take a deep look into the demographic we serve so we can kind of help unravel and guide people to liberation. Uh, because we experience pain is not just physical pain. And this is one of my favorite topics to talk about is pain and your second brain. Because when we were forming as an embryo in our mother's womb, the same clump of cells that form the brain, they split and they also form the digestive tract. So in your gut, fight, flight, freeze, or disappear exists here. Not intellect, but it sends a message to your brain and your brain puts a label on it and then you respond to a behavior. So our gastrointestinal tract, the stomach and intestines, your gut produces more of the feel-good neurotransmitter serotonin than your brain. So that's why when you eat a delicious meal, you have a nice flavor, you get this really wonderful feeling of home. That's because that's happening. More serotonin is coming out of your gut than it is your brain. So the balance of good and bad bacteria is the foundation for good health and recovery. So we know that in recovery circles from any form of trauma, the brain is a big area of focus and brain health. So when we're able to diversify our proteins and bring more in, we can support neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, and all of these new things that help us rebuild our lives. So when existing in survival mode, blood and energy is diverted to the muscles and extremities in anticipation of danger. So therefore, we are unable to maximize nutrient absorption. So think of young children that are living in a chaotic home and there's very little food in the kitchen. Even though they get what little food they might have, if they're still living in a chaotic environment in survival mode, their body is still not going to be able to absorb as much nutrients from the food, that what little food they might be getting. So this makes food programs, outreach programs, food support programs extremely important if we're going to help ease that and bring more safety into the home. Fight, flight, freeze, and disappear exist here in your gut. This message is sent to our brain and we put a label on it. And one example that I use in our groups all the time is that anger is a secondary emotion. It's not the first emotion you feel. Anger is a secondary emotion to fear. So it's not that we get mad first, it's that we get afraid and we shoots a message to our brain and we misinterpret it as anger when all along we were afraid. So if you can coach people to understand and stop and respond to whatever makes them angry, and say, what about this thing, this person, place, or thing that makes me angry? What about those things am I afraid of? And so when you do that backtracking, we usually realize it comes back to abandonment issues. It comes back to being unlovable. It comes back to the fear of failure. We trace it back to the fear of being out of control. So that's one of the ways that we're helping people to understand behavioral health and emotional intelligence, that there is a connection between what we eat and how we feed ourselves and how our brain responds to the world. Our session objectives today is hopefully I can get you to look at colonialism as a disease. I've been talking for a few years now saying it would be awesome if we could get colonialism, like alcoholism, but get colonialism recognized in texts like the DSM-5, because there is a symptomology to colonialism, how much we've internalized it, how much we express it, how much we deny it. So hopefully that will allow us to have a health paradigm shift. It's kind of like the FedEx logo. If I pull up a picture of the FedEx logo and I point out the arrow, you will never be able to unsee it. So the skill that we develop from that, hopefully you'll be able to translate this message and carry it to the people you serve, to weave it into your programming and to use it as a crowbar for leverage for more resources. We're looking at this through a clinical framework, but it's also community-based. So we can help identify modalities and so we can leverage more resources, because inside of cooking, there's a wealth of things going on at once, and we'll talk about that. We're also looking at this as a social framework. How do we, I would like to be able to validate your experience, because you as a practitioner are the expert. You are the one that are in the trenches, in the field, doing the heavy lifting, exerting all of the emotional labor. And I hope that we can together think of plant seeds now to build constructive systems to support the work that we do. The goal is one thing. A goal is a lofty, wonderful, brilliant idea, looks great on paper, but what is more important than the goal is the system to achieve it. So another objective is through a cultural framework, is that we look at indigenous cultivars, we think about place-based knowledge, we integrate indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, so we can use behavioral activation to reconnect strands of DNA, right? Someone tastes the traditional food or an indigenous food for the first time. They don't know why sometimes, but it just feels right. So that's kind of an example of how we can behavioral activate health and wellness. So I hope that this can inspire you to be fearless, to practice courage, and to continue this very daunting work that we're in. The terminology we'll use, like I was saying earlier, I kind of integrate a lot of different things into our work. So there's terms from the clinical realm like behavioral activation, food as an intervention. Food and cooking and farming are packed with cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT all the way around. Psychosocial intervention for depression, anxiety, substance use disorder, post-traumatic stress, all of these things. Sometimes when we teach someone a new recipe, they might think and be skeptical, but then when they taste and do it, their behavior is going to change their mind. Hey, it wasn't that hard. Hey, it was easy. Hey, I could do that better. And we kind of help instill the building blocks for health. Um, Packed into food as an intervention is a ton of dialectical behavioral therapy, a lot of talking, a lot of memories, processing circles, food groups, language revitalization. So much is packed into this that we're able to change a lot of these behavioral patterns that we didn't even know were just habits. Also, we integrating things like the adverse childhood experience model or diagram, and to look at ACEs of our population, not only just for the people we serve, but also for ourselves as practitioners. Stop and take a minute right now. If you're aware of what the ACE diagram is, have you taken the ACE quiz yourself? For me, as a person in recovery, I have an ACE score of 7. So that means I'm highly prone to become an alcoholic, a drug injection user, be incarcerated, or suffer early death. And some of those things did happen. So using tools like this, but not taking them as complete truths, because remember, this reality we deal with, we've got to make some hard decisions of what we're going to integrate into our lives and what we're going to redistribute to our people that we reach. And the realm of neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. There was once upon a time, I remember in my journey to recovery, where I felt like I was never going to get it right. I felt like I was doomed. And I even heard non-native clinicians say, well, you're Native American and you're genetically predisposed to becoming an addict. And I'm like, oh man, do you know what? Like what? And so we know now through research that that's not true. We know now that therapy culture as a construct, as a Western construct, an idea that made its way into the Americas, comes with assumptions and comes with biases. And those biases have historically dismissed the legacy of historical trauma. They have dismissed the legacy of trauma that we have inherited as Indigenous peoples and as marginalized groups. So doing whatever we can to support neuroplasticity, to rebuild our brains, to see the world clearly, is one of the most important things we can do. The political realm. This, as an intervention, it does involve politics. Our reality is woven and kind of encapsulated by political terminology. And some of the terms you'll hear me use, and you've already heard me say it, are themes like colonial violence. Colonial violence is another shapeshifter. It's woven into everything. It's woven into how we are given resources. It's woven into our grant making. It's woven into when we apply for grants. It's woven into the Constitution. It's woven into policy. So we have got to be able to identify it so we can pull back and disengage and replace it with something different. Colonization is a term that maybe 20, 30 years ago wasn't as popular as it is now. But colonization, like I was saying, is, to me, in my opinion, is the act of violence or the first encounter, right? And then the fallout effect. After the violence is done, the emotional, spiritual malady that sets in is colonialism. And then so it's up to us to seek out intelligent, calculated pathways to decolonize. And so these terms are woven into our reality as practitioners. Sometimes people are afraid to use them. Sometimes it's not safe to use them. So being able to identify and use your emotional intelligence is very important. Another area of terminology in the cultural and spiritual realm, one term that I came across years ago by a colleague of mine was cosmological relationship. And to me, when I heard that term, it just was like a light bulb went off. I was like, oh my gosh, that is exactly what I've been wondering, what I am feeling about these indigenous foods. The cosmological relationship regarding ceremony, song, planting, cultural protocol, the timing of our seasonality, when wild foods are available, and when we're supposed to plant, are connected to this, the position of like the Big Dipper, the position of the moon and the stars, and where we are in the solar system. So cosmological relationship with food relatives is a tool that I'm giving to you. Traditional ecological knowledge. There was a recent, I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago, the president's administration released a press memo saying that traditional ecological knowledge was able to be used in programming, government structures, education, and I was like, cool, that's awesome. So it's getting a little bit more recognized, but it is something that we have always been using, and when we can recognize it, it's one of the most simple and most beneficial protective factors we can activate. Indigenous foodways, there is a whole slew of indigenous foodways jargon out there. And I encourage you to go down the rabbit hole and find and utilize these terms for your practice. Indigenous food sovereignty, the ability for us to use food the way we see fit and not be held back by governmental red tape, food police red tape, or USDA red tape. Sometimes when we know it's going to work, we have to activate and sometimes ask for forgiveness later, or we can see that it really was successful and do it again. So the realm of food sovereignty is very, very important. And indigeneity is a term that I even have listed in my list of principles that we use here, is to basically it's feeling safe to be indigenous, because sometimes in some realms it is not safe to feel or to be native. So just offering some terminology to expand your skill set, but maybe even you know all of these already, but they're validating your experience. Just like when I hear you speak, you'll say things that make me feel like, wow, okay, I'm doing that too. So some terminology to offer as tools. Because remember, as community, we have inherited legacies of violence. As traumatized populations, it's our duty to meet them where they're at, to be able to be sensitive to these themes, to not come into it with assumptions, to have to be able to be human and not a robot, right? Because we inherited place-based legacies of violence. Here in the White Mountain Apache region, 500, 300, 400 years ago was interactions with Spain, right? And the conquistadors as they made their way through. In the 1800s was the settlers rushing to California for the gold rush. So settler colonialism has different place-based legacies of violence that Native peoples did not create. We inherited them. So if that's true, then it's up to us as practitioners to plant the seeds of legacies of health and recovery, and use tools like the ACE pyramid or diagram. Have no judgment in the work, because when we can speak to the heart, we'll reach the heart. If we just speak to the mind, we're just going to reach the mind. So we really want to change hearts so that they can change their minds. And a recovery term that I use in everything I do is placing principles before personalities. Because if we have a strong set of principles to operate with, we will always be able to use and make a good decision without making judgments or assumptions on who we're trying to interact with. And develop and focus on human connection and empathy, because these are the things that allow us to heal. And another favorite term is emotional intelligence. I tell my demographic and my adult groups, my youth groups, people in early recovery from different things, that you are street smart, you are creative, you are resourceful, you are funny, you are all these things, and that does not mean you are less than. So when you can validate somebody's emotional intelligence, you can allow them to make the decision that says, hey, I deserve to be happy. Therefore, then they can say, all right, I deserve to be happy. I'm worth saving. I'm going to go and get some training. I'm going to go back to school. You can heighten your IQ if you focus on your emotional intelligence first. So I'm offering that as another tool. And this picture here that I have on the board there, the one on the right, is that old Manifest Destiny wartime propaganda image that kind of promoted the taking of the landscape of the United States region. One of the terms with that photo was terra nullius, the dead landscape. And so this is what it kind of looked like, is supposedly they're carrying knowledge and wisdom, technology, schooling, all that stuff. and the natives are running in the dark. Well, in the past 5 or 10 years, a native artist recreated that image and says we're pushing back and we're bringing traditional ecological knowledge, wealth, and health back too, and we're fighting back. So that's, I put that image in there to illustrate the communities of violence and legacies of violence, but also legacies of health and resurgence. We have got to be very keen and sensitive to our own perceptions and paradigms as we work with the population. We're dealing with broken hearts. We're dealing with terrified people that put off like they're tough. We're dealing with the demographic that is wounded but might not even know where the pain is coming from. So I put this up here in this presentation because basically the definition, implicit bias, suggests that people can act on the basis of prejudice and stereotypes without even intending to do so. What unconscious hidden biases is stopping you and your staff from delivering stellar service? And I feel like us in the realm and the population that we work with, we get training in how to deal with this. Most of society is unaware of some of the health modalities, the approaches, the social work terms and tools. So we're at an advantage, but that does not mean the work stops there. We've got to look at how do we carry gender bias? How do we carry racial bias? How do we carry cultural bias? How do we carry and handle our own age-related bias and also disability-related bias? And that's just a short list of the types. So this presentation is to challenge your skill set, validate it, but also to have us look in the mirror. Because if we're going to practice this, continue this work, we've got to be the best practitioners that we can be. So here's a slide that I put in to illustrate behavioral activation of indigeneity. This is a picture of my son. He's picking what we call chongkuje, or it's like edible sumac here in the White Mount Apache region. And he's got a big Hubbard squash there, and he's got some yucca blossoms. One of my favorite recovery phrases is experience is the best teacher. So it's less about what I say as a facilitator, and it's more about what the person takes away from the experience. Because we activate muscle memory throughout our whole body. Sometimes even our heart and our muscles are reacting in a certain way by habit. So we can program ourselves to respond differently through new behaviors. Following our cultural intuition is extremely important. Relationship building is key to supporting any health modality. Sensory experience. This whole session is a sensory experience. If you were here in person with me, you could see, smell, hear, taste, touch, everything, and you would have that experience as the best teacher moment. And another favorite recovery phrase I like to use is when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And the teacher is not just someone like myself. The teacher could be a health diagnosis. The teacher could be a divorce. The teacher could be the loss of a job. The teacher could be a car wreck. The teacher could be a happy moment. So whenever you're ready, that experience is going to present itself to you and it's going to teach. So behavioral activation is a very important tool, and I like to offer it to all the groups and people and demographics I reach. So here's a slide on neurodecolonization. It's one of my favorite areas to really geek out on and go down the wormhole. There's a whole emerging body of work about neurodecolonization, not just decolonization on a political, legal frontline aspect, but decolonization all the way down to our telomeres, to our brain cells, to our neural pathways, even decolonization as deep as decolonizing our microbiome. So I put on here this definition. I'll just read the neuroplasticity one. It's neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to change in structure and function in response to experience. When we think, feel, and act in novel ways, we change our brain. So to me, this is really how behavioral activation, indigenous foodways, cooking and eating, gardening help restructure our brains. And this is also why food memories are so powerful. If you have never tasted this dish I'm going to make today, you don't have a neural pathway to hold the data. The minute you taste something new for the first time, an atomic thunderbolt happens, then a new pathway is formed, and you have a memory, a new neural pathway to hold the data of that memory. So food is very powerful. I said in the beginning, land back is also access to care. And when we have land back, we have access to protective factors. So I put protective factors. I just put a quick little statement there. It says our culture is our medicine. So protective factors are anything that protect our health. And I just listed a bunch of cool Apache ones here. And this image on the left is an image that I want to stress. If the protective factor doesn't exist, the image doesn't exist, or the vocabulary terminology doesn't exist, create it. As an Indigenous person, as a practitioner, as a professional, you are the expert that has the ability to create the terms and tools you need. So this image is kind of what an example of that. When we were searching the internet for images of Native community and fun stuff to make youth programming, it didn't exist out there for us. So we had to create it. And the image here has some young Apache farmers, some athletes. I put a skater on there because I'm an old skater from back in the day. Apache songs in our culture. So allowing our population to leverage their inexpensive or cost-free protective factors and focusing in on food as a major protective factor at home as well. This is, I'm almost done with the slides. This slide right here is one of my favorite teaching tools. And I'll use the example of early recovery or recovery, but it can apply to anything. New job, new relationship, marriage, fatherhood, parenthood, whatever it might be, but I'll use recovery as the kind of example. And I learned this when I was in a homeless shelter years ago in Baltimore, and I sketched it in a notebook and I still use it today. So the way this diagram works, the process of learning and application is you come into early recovery incapable and unconscious of the fact that you're able to take care of yourself. You are incapable and you don't even know that you're incapable of taking care of yourself. You say, okay, I'm going to stick with this recovery thing. I like it. I have to. Whatever reason you're there, you stay and you learn a little bit more. You become conscious, but you also realize you're still incapable. You become aware, but you also become aware of the fact that you might not have the skills yet. So you're still in a position of vulnerability. Say, okay, I got a lot to learn. I'm going to stick with this thing. And you continue the work. Then you become capable and you become conscious. You become conscious of how much work you've put in, how much you didn't know in the beginning, and how much you're learning now. And now this is where I say it becomes fun. You become dangerous, right? You become equipped with the tools and the knowledge. You stick with it. You enter into maintenance phase. You enter into long-term change. And then pretty soon, whatever it was you were trying to learn in the beginning, now it's as natural as tying your shoes. You do it without thinking. Change has set. Behavioral activation has worked. Neuroplasticity has happened. Your behavioral activation has allowed you to go through this process of transformation. And I put form, finesse, repetition is what recovery is all about. So it's a tool that helped save my life, and I'm offering it to you for your work. Because health is a process, not an event. Just like they say recovery is a process, not an event. It's the same thing with health. Whatever we create, it's got to be transformational. And I made this meme. See that? How you enter my kitchen, the Tifgaha kitchen. You're looking in, I'm hungry. What's going on in there? And then this is how you're going to leave my session today. You came into my group saying, came to the keynote saying, I wonder what this is going to be about. Food at a large conference. And now you're equipped. This is how you're going to leave. So whatever you create, make sure it's transformational. It has a lot of heart, but it's also based on some solid skills as well. Because recovery in all sectors is a journey. A lot of people think recovery is a quick fix and a fast way to health, but recovery is a lifetime. Changes of whether it's health disparities, domestic violence, recovery from incarceration, diabetes, a broken heart, loss, whatever it might be, the path and the process of grief is always going to be this this journey. So I want to thank you for that. And this is the last slide. I'm gonna go into the cooking demonstration. I'll talk about some ingredients, but I hope that that presentation allowed you to challenge your perspective, to allow you to see yourself. Let me see. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and leave it there. I might push something wrong. Okay, I'm gonna open this up so I can see. And so the the process of cooking is something I've been doing since I was a little kid. And I didn't know that a lot of these themes I was talking about were packed into the cooking all along. When I was back in culinary school, I didn't know these elements were there. The longer I worked and the harder I trained, and the more I cultivated the desire to understand native foodways, these things brought themselves to me. And had I known this early on, it might be different. But for me, in my journey to recovery and practicing now, has been that whole phrase, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So for me, my biggest teachers have been indigenous foods. And the dish we're going to do today is one that I like to teach as like a threshold dish. It's one that you can teach at home. It's one that you can do as a research project. You could write a thesis. You could even do a dissertation on it. You could plant it for a kindergarten school group, or you could provide your clients with seeds and workshops on how to do this dish and plant the ingredients. And the dish we're going to do is called Three Sisters. Some of you probably heard about it, but if you haven't, Three Sisters is a combination of corn, of beans, and squash. So corn, beans, and squash are kind of the three of these together. Corn is excuse me. Corn is nutritious on its own, but it's lacking a couple amino acids to form a protein. When you add the beans and you add the squash together, they form a complete protein. So to me, this is a very neat physical evidence of ancestral intelligence. And beyond that, when it starts as a seed, the way it's planted, there's a planting method. It's called companion planting. So corn is planted in the middle, right? Planted first. Beans are planted around it. So beans have a natural bean stalk to hang on it. Squash is planted at the base. So the big squash leaves, they kind of shade the corn. They keep it cool. They retain moisture. And so all three of these ingredients, from seed to when we consume them, are working together. Beans are releasing nitrogen into the soil that the corn needs to be healthy. All three are working together, so then when we are able to consume them, this companion planting technique is thousands and thousands of years old. And so to me, this is light years beyond fry bread and light years before fry bread. And when I get to teach it, I like to say this is ancestral intelligence. This is indigenous science. This is public health. This is who we are. So the way I'm going to do this is I've done a little bit of prep work ahead of time, but on some of the tools I like to offer for the cooking side, I always like to allow people to see for themselves. As a chef, all my career, people have said, "Hey, chef, how come I don't see any Native American restaurants? How come I don't know any Native American recipes? What are some native foods besides fry bread?" And so my journey now, instead of saying, well, you can only do hand harvested wild ingredients from the top of the sacred mountain and blah, 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 you know what I mean? I try not to create barriers. There's a time and a place for those very special exacting ingredients, but also the world has been consuming native foods all along. Through this process of colonization and cultural erasure, we've forgotten the legacy, or we've been disconnected from this legacy of ancestral indigenous science and agriculture. So example of that is that every single variety of squash did not exist anywhere in Europe before 1500. None of it. Every single variety of tomato, from the heirlooms, the teardrops, the Romas, the plum tomatoes, none of them existed in Europe anywhere before 1500. So think of all the Italian foods, the classic Espanol sauce, all of the different curries that might have tomato in it. None of those dishes were like that before 1500. Every single chili around the world did not exist anywhere outside of the Americas before 1500. There was no Korean hot pot, no spicy Indian curries, no chili flakes in the Spanish dishes. None of that were being used before 1500 in Europe, Asia, India, and Africa before we had it. I mean, before they got it from us. Same thing with corn. Every variety and color of corn did not exist anywhere in the world but the Americas. Through indigenous science, seed saving, bioengineering, and indigenous science, our people developed these as far back as, say, the tomato is like 8,000, 6,000 BC. Hundreds of varieties are already being used and domesticated. The chili, by the time the pyramids in Giza were built, these were already being used about 2,000 years before that. So squash, same thing. There's a whole list of indigenous cultivars that we could talk about all day today. But if you go to the grocery store, you walk down that whole Italian section, all the tomato sauces, all that's not Italian food. That's all indigenous food. You go to the sweet section, you see all that chocolate. That's not in Swiss chocolate from Switzerland. That's indigenous foods. So chocolate, chilies, corn, beans, squash, amaranth, sunchoke, sunflowers, cranberries, wild rice. There's a whole list of indigenous foods. So as food as a community intervention, I do my best to not create barriers, but allow people to see that native foods have been there all along. They've changed the world. And when we reclaim some of this information, we're better equipped to make food choices, new food choices. So in our groups, we call that expanding our food vocabulary, because when we have more choices and more skills, when you have a more broad food vocabulary, it's going to impact your health in the long term. So food education at the home front is extremely important, not just the restaurants, because not everyone can afford to go to a restaurant. So that's one of my favorite spiels, to talk about native foods. And like I said, we could have a whole series and go over this dish by dish by dish by dish. But today we're going to focus on Three Sisters and the concept of symbiotic relationships, things working together, and we will do that. So we'll get started. What I've got here, when I do Three Sisters, the dish, I tell people to just do it in equal parts corn, equal parts beans, equal parts squash. And then you could add whatever seasons you want. You can add some chilies, you could add different spices and herbs, but the baseline is just any type of corn, equal parts corn, equal parts beans, equal parts squash. So I'm using some Anasazi beans. These ones tell a cool story. There's numerous stories out there, but the story that I like to tell, or that I've heard numerous times, is that these were almost extinct. That in an archaeological dig, they found these in a clay pot and they planted them and they grew. So that speaks to the power of seeds. And now we have them again today. So I'm using Anasazi beans. They cook in about 45 minutes, about half the time of like pinto beans. Very fibrous, kind of sweet and creamy, and very delicious. So one of these ingredients. Another one that I have cooked ahead of time is some white navy beans. I just simmer these in water till they're tender. I don't simmer them to where they're mushy and falling apart. I want them to have some of their texture. And I'm going to do zucchini and roasted corn. So I'm going to start with the corn. I'm going to turn on my little stove here. Going to get my side towel. And so for the corn, I've roasted it in the oven. I've trimmed it down, and now all I got to do is essentially just reheat it. So one of my favorite metaphors in the kitchen is working with a knife. Your mind is like a knife. It's a tool. It can be sharp. It can stay sharp. It'll last for many years. It'll take you a lot of places if you treat it with respect and care, just like your mind. If you choose to disrespect your knife, it can get dull. You can lose it. It can get chipped, and it can also become a weapon to destroy. So you can make a choice on what side of the principle you want to be on. So my knife, I'm going to take my knife and just hold my knife hand here, and here's my guide hand. I'm going to use my knuckles as a guide. See that? And I'm going to take it. And the first cut I'm going to do with the corn, this is how I like to do it, because I could do it like this and it would scatter everywhere. They would all run away, try to escape. So I'm going to try to keep them. I take it, I hold it carefully, and I just square it off. Now it's stable. See that? It's not rolling around. Now it's stable, and I'm going to kind of envision a pentagon shape. So I'm going to go, that was one cut. I'm going to do 2, 3, 4, and then 5. You see that? Then I'll go back and get any of these last pieces there and get those off. Yeah. And I haven't made a big mess. It's not all over the floor, all over the cutting board. I got a nice pile of roasted corn, and I'm going to set my cob here in my compost bin. The next ingredient is a squash, just a regular zucchini. What I think is really neat about the Three Sisters combination is that there are probably millions of ways to create protein with plants just by doing this dish. Because you think of yellow squash, kobacha squash, pumpkins, um, uh, pumpkins, delicata squash, butternut squash. You know, there's all these different varieties, and then all the different colors of corn, all the different types of beans, all the different seasonality variations, dried, fresh, preserved, baby, whatever. There's probably millions of combinations of Three Sisters. So I'm just taking my squash, I took it, and I'm just carefully cutting it. And this is the dish that I like to teach, where I'm not being too fussy about exact cuts. You can do this grandma style. It doesn't have to be diced. You could use fresh, dried, red corn, white corn, whatever you want to do. It does not have to be exactly cut perfectly. You just want to make sure it's nice and wholesome and fresh, and simple is best. So I'm going to take this and I'm just dicing it. Again, using my guide hand and my knife hand. See that? Protecting my fingertips. And we're gonna start the dish here. So through the course of this presentation, provided a lot of information. And one of the things that maybe I can challenge you to do this during the course of the next series of holidays that are coming up is teach this dish. Put it on your table for Thanksgiving, or I like to say Indigenous Foods Day, for Christmas, for New Year's. You could turn this into a soup, but tell the story of cultural revitalization by using these 3 cultivars. And if some of what I said today is sparking some interest, follow the cultivars because they will tell the truth. You could follow the history of quinoa, follow the history of chocolate, follow the history of amaranth, follow the history of these, and you will get the scientific agricultural evidence, not the colonizer's narrative of migrational patterns, nutritional benefits, how far back they've been domesticated, and where. So pretty cool stuff of how these guys tell stories. My pan is heating up. I got some light olive oil. I'm just gonna add some in there. And so I hope there's a couple questions because this dish is gonna come together quickly. And I'll take a couple questions at the end. So I just swirl my pan, make sure it's nice and hot. It's just at the smoking point. So what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna add my corn, get it in there. I'm adding the corn because I wanted to get a little bit caramelized and roasty. I got some that's already cut off the cob. And remember, my corn was cooked ahead of time. I roasted it in the oven inside the husks about 20 minutes, 350 degrees, 400 degrees. I brought it out and let it cool, and I trimmed it. So now I'm just basically reheating it. So I'm going to take it, let it get a little bit of caramelization on there. And my favorite part about cooking is that this is also a science, right? I'm working with lipids. I'm working with minerals like salt. I'm working with animal proteins. I'm working with fat. I'm working with fire or radiant energy transfer. I'm learning about caramelization and the construction of flavors. All of these really neat things that were there all along. Now all we do is just pull them out and frame them as an intervention, frame them as a skill technique, frame them as even maybe a career. But more importantly is that we allow people to expand their food knowledge for better health. So now I'm going to add my zucchini because zucchini doesn't take too long. And I've got a little bit cut up right here already. Get it out of the bowl. So we're going to give it a toss. Turn this guy up. I'm going to use a tomato. And tomato is not a vegetable, it's a fruit, but there's also a little bit of acidity in here. So I'm going to use that acidity of the tomato to help brighten it up a little bit right at the end. So I'm just going to take it, cut it, and I'm not going to be too fussy. I'm just going to take it and cut it in a dice, like a large dice. And I'm going to add this right at the end. Just get it cut. Set it off to the side. I've got some flat leaf parsley. I like to use flat leaf parsley because the leaves are a little bit bigger. But say it was summertime, you could use lamb's quarters. You could use any type of wild green you wanted. The choice is yours, but I've got flat leaf parsley. So I'm just going to take it. I'm going to bunch it up into the palm of my hand. Get it nice into a little ball. I'm going to take my knife, put it right up against there, and I'm just going to run my knife through it. That way my blade comes in contact with as many leaves as possible, and I'm not chasing it all over the board trying to chop. See that? Now let's go back maybe 1 or 2 more times. Just a little bit of chopped parsley. So let's give this guy a stir. You can see that? The corn and the squash there. The two sisters. But now, since the zucchini is diced, medium dice, whatever, it won't take long to cook. If the pan looks like it's drying up a little bit, I'm just going to add just a touch more olive oil. But I'm just sauteing, I'm not frying, okay? So what I'm relying on is the construction of flavors. So like, if you can see, there's some caramelized or roasted brown pieces in there. I want that flavor to develop. So that's why it's important to have a nice hot pan. So as it's heating up, I can see as I look at it, that I can see that the zucchini is lightly cooked. It's lightly cooked. So I'm going to add the beans now. The beans have just been cooked separately. And I'm going to add the anasazis. I like to store my white beans in the liquid so I can have some of that cooking liquid kind of like a stock. See that? See the cooking liquid? It's nice and viscous. It's not just like water anymore. So I'm going to use this kind of to help deglaze the pan. So I'm going to add my white beans. And you can see the cooking liquid is still in the bowl. And when I store them in the liquid, it helps to keep the skins on the beans from like unraveling. So I'm going to give that a stir. I still got the cooking liquid. I'm going to reserve that. Give it another stir. I'm going to turn this up just a touch. So now at this point, I'm just letting it reheat. I'm just letting it reheat. And if you noticed, I haven't added any salt yet. I'm waiting till the very end. So there's a number of flavors in here. The nice roasted sweet corn, the grassy zucchini squash, the earthy the navy beans and the anasazi beans. So there's a lot of flavors going on. Now I'm going to brighten it up by adding the tomatoes. And you don't have to use tomatoes, but I like them because they're another indigenous food. And if I wanted it a little bit more bright, I would hit it with a little bit of lemon juice. Or if you wanted a different type of vinegar. Because acids kind of behave similar to salt in that without adding too much sodium, they help enhance flavors. So we'll give this a stir or a toss. So I think I'm really near the end of this demonstration. Is there a question that might want to be posed? This is almost done, like 30 seconds and it's done.
We do have a few questions. Did you want to go ahead and take those now?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got some from the chat. Firstly, Synth Server, apologies if I mispronounce. They are wondering, does a chef have a cookbook with this information? I need it.
Is there one exclamation point or 2 or 3?
There's one, but I think we're feeling like should be multiple at this point.
Yeah, is it all caps or no? I'm just teasing. No, I don't have a cookbook yet. I'm working on a book that spells out some of this information. So you can follow me on like Instagram. I'm more on Instagram than like Facebook, but I do a lot of postings there. It's just at Nephi Craig, at Nephi_Craig, and the cafe link is at Cafe Gojo. So you can just find me on there and look for more information. I'm not too aggressive in my posting, but I post there frequently and I share some stuff like this on there. So I added the parsley. Is there another question?
Yes, I've got one from Kirsten. Will we get the recipe?
Yes, I can email a recipe for this particular combination. But again, remember, don't let a recipe stop you. Just remember equal parts corn, beans, and squash. So this dish is almost done. I'm going to add a couple slices of chili. Any other questions?
We've got another from Synth. Is there a substitute for corn? I think this is coming from an allergy perspective.
No real substitution for corn. I guess you could just call it two sisters. I don't know. No real substitution for corn, I think. You could add garbanzo beans. It wouldn't be three sisters, but garbanzo beans would still have even more protein too. So I hope that answers it. I'm going to season this now, finally at the end with a little bit of salt. This is kosher salt. So I use kosher salt in most of the cooking. I use a cracked black pepper milk. So let's give this a toss. Any other questions?
Yeah, we've got one from Anne. Besides composting the corn cob, are there other uses for a corn cob in cooking, such as stews or making a broth?
Yeah, we make corn stock all the time. You can break the cob in half and put it in a pot of stew. It'll add some nourishment and some corn flavor to it. When it's done, just take it out and compost it then. But there's still a lot of good benefit inside the corn cob. It's a good question. Or you can make a pipe like Popeye. Ooh, that's good. I'm gonna add just a touch more cracked black pepper. Just another little hit of salt. So I'm gonna put this in the dish here. Yeah. So edible education, traditional ecological knowledge, public health, a dish you could do at home and tell the story and create those traditions of health and wellness, and validating indigenous expertise in agriculture across millennia. So a very, very beautiful, tasty version of Three Sisters right here. So delicious, awesome. Serve it at Thanksgiving. Take a picture, post it, tag me, whatever you want. But please, I hope you feel like you could do this. I hope that you look at it and say, wow, I could do that easy too, and practice it over and over and over. I'm at the end of my time. Is there any other questions? If not, I want to thank you for your time and attention, allowing me to be with you and share some of my experience with you all. Thank you very much.
I don't have a question, Chef. My name is Laura Lee, and I am a citizen of the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Nation, and I'm in Mesa, Arizona at the time. And I just want to raise my hands to you. I've been cooking since I was a wee girl with my daddy and grandma. So your whole presentation just enlivened me one more time to cook from my heart, to be there. And my sobriety date is 3/11 of 91. My creator didn't want me to be a drunken Indian woman. So thank you for and I'm going to travel to see you at your place. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Wado.
Thank you.
We do have some other questions for you. I've got one from Stan. Can you share the teaching about the importance of cooking with love? If you are very sad or mad, you should not cook. Also, how certain traditional foods are medicine.
Yes, that's a really good question, and thank you for asking that. the way that we remind people in our recovery groups and just in general, any class, is that love is a verb, right? Love is a verb. It's not just a word. Love is an action, and love is a verb that we show and demonstrate. Sometimes we might misinterpret and think that love is only good feelings. Love is only positive feelings. Love is only wonderful things. But sometimes the act of love for yourself, the feelings attached to it, don't always feel good. Like being in early recovery. It's terrible, it's difficult, it's scary, it's terrifying, but it's the best, most powerful act of love behaviorally that you could do. The same thing with creating boundaries, the same things with making food choices, changing eating habits at home. So I also feel like, and we also use this in our groups too, is that food can be a way to process grief. So for those of you that might run talking circles, host group dynamics, one way an example is to be able to ask people what's a favorite food of someone that is no longer with us, and cook that recipe and talk about it, share about it. What about that person did you learn that recipe from? Was it your mom, your grandmother, a sibling? There's a lot of emotional connections to food and food memories. So be able to identify and draw those out, because it's such a tactile, disarming way to be able to engage people. Not only our clients and the population we're trying to reach, but for us at home too. So I hope that's one layer of a question that I offered there for you. Thank you for that.
All right, next question is from Brandy. Does the combination of the three sisters help with digestion of the components?
Oh yeah, definitely. Think of all the fiber in the zucchini, the corn, and the beans. And when I think of all of these combined, they're, like I was saying, from seed through the growth process to when we consume them, and then even down in our digestive tract, they're all working together, right? Trying to detox to remove some of the bad bacteria that might be stored in our gut to replace it with good healthy bacteria. And a note on that, there's some of the discussion out there about our microbiome is that even our microbiome is colonized. Some of the gut bacteria comes from large sugar, rice, alcohol, processed foods. That gut bacteria is practicing self-preservation. So the theory is that it's producing cravings for more of those foods. So when we can start to invigorate our diet with more color, more fresh foods, we're begin to slowly replace the healthy bacteria or indigenous bacteria to produce cravings for something like this, as opposed to a bag of hot Cheetos or a bag of XYZ chips or something else like that. So a very good question. I hope that answers it.
Thank you, but how dare you talk about Cheetos that way?
I know, right? I should have done a crushed Cheeto crusted salmon for a top of Three Sisters or something.
All right, we have another question from Sim. My understanding is all corn after 1954 has been GMO'd. So how could we get non-colonized corn? Would that take away the allergic component?
I don't know that specific answer. That's a really deep, harsh political debate about our food system, and to kind of it magnifies how delicate our food system is and how at risk our public health is also. So the whole conversation about GMO and non-GMO for our personal consumption is one where we have more control over. But a lot of times, us as practitioners, when we're trying to open the doorway for our demographic to make more food choices, sometimes, or at least for us, it's about expanding the food vocabulary so they can take those first steps, so we don't create barriers. So I hope that's kind of a roundabout way to answer that. Maybe you could do some investigation on your own and hit me up on Instagram and let me know, because I don't know. I hope it is, but I think there's a lot of different dynamics and barriers when it comes to the GMO, non-GMO processed, and you know what I mean? There's a whole realm of science and politics there that, at least for our demographic, might shut them down and cause them to say, oh man, well, I'm not even going to try. So I think opening the door to fresh foods, and the skill building is the first step for us. On the personal level, it might require some more investigation.
You mentioned your Instagram, great segue. We had someone in the chat ask earlier if you could repeat your Instagram again.
Okay, it's just my name, NEPHI_Craig. That's it.
I'll drop that in chat.
Yeah, awesome.
All right,
check it out.
Lane. Lane had a question. Did you add salt solely at the end? Why season at the end rather than the beginning?
I like to season at the end for this. When I got the nice hot pan, you heard it sizzle and you might have seen some of the corn pop out of it, but I'm really trying to create that first layer of flavor, the golden brown caramelization. And that's even notes of umami in there. So nice hot pan, brown it a little bit, add all the other ingredients, and I season at the end. That's just my choice because I don't want to add too much sodium, and kind of my philosophy of cooking has kind of gotten away from some of the European perceptions of food and building flavors. Like, for example, I don't cook my beans in chicken stock. I don't cook my beans in beef stock. I'll just cook them in water because, or maybe like water and half an onion or a clove of garlic or something. But I really just want these ingredients to be who they are. You know what I mean? I want them to have just nice, clean, simple flavors, and then season at the end and brighten them with like acids like tomatoes or lime juice and bright herbs at the end. So that's why I do it at the end. Certain dishes I'll season in the beginning, but for Three Sisters, I like to do it because I just want to taste these three ingredients. So I hope that answers it.
Sherry's wondering, where can we get the special beans?
Oh, okay. Anasazi beans, I found them in a number of from a number of vendors. I think go online and just look it up, purchasing Anasazi beans. I think Ramona Farms used to carry them or might still carry them, but depending on your region, I've even seen them in some health food stores. So just do some research and look. They're pretty inexpensive. They're a little bit more than pinto beans, but you won't be disappointed. They'll cook in like almost half the time. For this application, I just soaked them overnight and they were done in like 30-40 minutes. Toothsome and nice and soft.
Okay, I'm maybe mispronouncing this name. Ryan, Wryan, is wondering, are there other substitutions, I assume, for this recipe that you would recommend?
Substitutions as far as a particular ingredient or anything specific?
That's what the question says. I don't know if they want to jump in.
Either adding or taking away. Just like you were talking about putting maybe salmon on top of it, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
what are some other things to like just soup it up a little bit, you know?
Yeah,
Good pairing.
definitely. Definitely. Well, at least for substitutions, you could do any type of bean you wanted. It doesn't have to be Anasazi and navy beans. It could be kidney beans. It could be black beans. It could be the huge lima beans. There's a whole slew of different types of beans, by the way, are all indigenous foods. So like the only two beans that were present in Europe before 1500 were the fava bean and the soybean. But any other bean that makes it into Spanish, Hungarian, Mediterranean cuisines, India, Asia, Japan, none of them existed. So really, you could really substitute any type of bean. Same thing for corn, same thing for squash. And you could change it up seasonally. And then you could do this as a side dish at home, or if you wanted, have a completely separate plate, put a little bit in the middle, serve it with a steak, some roasted turkey, a nice piece of salmon. It's an awesome dish.
Yolanda is asking a question I think that we all probably have. Do you ever do this where you have folks come in person and learn with you? That would be a great opportunity.
Yeah, it's one of the best ways to do it, because normally I would do a cooking demonstration like this and we'd be distributing samples at this point right now, and we'd be tasting and talking. A cooking class, the class would come in, we'd do a quick historical recovery history overview, and then we get in the class and cook it together. Might not just be this dish. We might be doing some fish or some meat or other vegetable sides as well. So hands-on cooking classes are extremely valuable for all ages.
Rachel is wondering, what advice do you have for parents and families who are trying to change eating habits at home and may have resistance from children and youth in their family?
That's a great, awesome question, because that's where a lot of the barriers present themselves often, is that a lot of times we as parents, because of our own biases with food and maybe even stressors, we might, when we're asked to do something that requires a little more attention to food, we might get stressed out and respond in a way that says, no, I don't have time. Can't you just eat this? Here, eat this. Kind of inadvertently, not meaning to do harm or shut down our children, but opening it up and switching it up and saying, okay, well, maybe let's practice this on the weekend, or we'll do this as an activity. Depending on the age of your child or the children, you could have them do some of the work. They could wash the squash. They could help you soak the beans. If you feel comfortable, let them use a small paring knife. They could cut some of the corn or even cut the squash. Again, the squash does not need to be nice and perfectly diced. It could be cut in rounds or half moons, but involve them in the process. Cook with a smile. Bring them into the fold and allow them to do age-appropriate tasks, and make it a behavior change over the long run. Don't just do it once, for Thanksgiving and that's it. Make it a new thing. And it doesn't have to be just indigenous foods. It could be making omelets in the morning. It could be cooking breakfast really quickly, prepping it the night before so you get a little bit of quicker start time in the morning or for dinner. But I think ultimately, when we involve our kids more, allow them to taste, and we teach and share with enthusiasm, they'll slowly start to open up. Might be slow resistance, but it needs to start early or be reinvigorated gently as they get older. So I hope that answers it. My oldest is 21, and my daughter is 7, and my youngest is 6. So we cook frequently all the time.
Yeah, I love that, cooking with a smile.
Mm-hmm.
Probably need to do that more often. All right, 2 more questions from the chat. Synth says, I've heard about putting fish at the bottom of the corn when you plant. Is that true? And what does it do?
Yeah, it's true. It's just fertilizing. It's just fertilizing the soil, adding more nutrients, adding more biodiversity, because more important than the seed and the plant itself is the soil and the roots. So having healthy soil, participating in composting or getting compost will enrich your soil. And kind of another tool that comes to mind when you bring that up is composting is a great metaphor for processing trauma, for processing grief, for processing self-esteem issues. We could say, okay, this moldy old parsley looks crappy. I don't want it. I don't like it. And so you can say, all right, but we don't know when we put this in the compost pile, what we thought was moldy, awful, smelly, and unwanted is going to transform when we trust the process into something rich that's going to enliven our soil for the rest of our lives. So when we're out in the garden or in the field, we could have a compost pile and use that as a tool to talk about self-esteem. Say, okay, well, I once upon a time felt like I was a deadbeat dad, and I'm gonna put that in the compost pile. And now, a year later in my recovery, it's something that I still refer to. I don't deny it or hide it, but I know that's a part of my experience, and I'm no longer ashamed of it. I'm able to talk about it and help others to see that as well. So that whole adding fish to the roots or composting, it's a great metaphor. As you can see, there's a lot of really neat things that come out of the food for working with behavioral health and recovery and things like that. So thank you for asking that.
All right, it looks like we're closing down comments just solely for time purposes here right away. I just have a few more in. And then I'm sure we can get back to folks with answers to any of the questions that you might have that we don't have time to get to today. Let's see. I've got a question. Is part of their recovery growing their own ingredients? I think this was in regards to the recovery and treatment work.
It can be, depending on the resources that you have. You can build it into your programming. And gardening and farming, the way to kind of frame it for acceptance into your programming would be that, number one, it's a mindful activity. When you're out there weeding, you're interacting with all of your senses. You're soaking up vitamin D from the sun. You're experiencing something new. It's a positive stressor in some ways where you're up and down, lifting and doing things. But it's also a natural science. On the indigenous side, it's reclaiming indigenous technology. It's themes of land back. It's themes of ancestral intelligence, and a whole bunch of other really important things. We could collaborate with another farm. For us, we've got a small recovery garden that clients work with, but we've also got a couple another farm that's not affiliated with the treatment center that we collaborate with, purchase from, and also do sessions and stuff from. But supporting local agriculture is a really important part. If you have the ability and the resources to do that in your program, I really encourage you to initiate it, and find some really good farmers that are just as passionate about the work as you are, and that relationship will most likely flourish.
Okay, I think our last question for today that we'll answer in person. We've got one from Marilyn. It is apple season. What do you like to do with apples?
Oh my gosh, all kinds of stuff. We like to dehydrate them towards the end of the season. We like to roast them for savory dishes. We'll dice them up and serve them as snacks. There's even apple salads, a whole slew of things to do with apples. Of course, making apple juice and ciders, making apple pies and turnovers. There's a whole bunch of things you could do with apples. It's a tough question to answer because there's so many.
All right. Well, we are going to wrap this up. We want to thank you so very much, Chef Craig, for opening up our 5th annual ICYF conference. I do know that he checks his Instagram because that's how we were able to make the connection and get him on board to be able to present to you all here today. It was just, I knew it was going to be amazing. I was going to nerd out on all of it, and you just blew us away. So thank you so much. We look forward to continuing our partnership and collaboration with the work that you're doing and how we can support our Indian children, youth, and families across Washington State and beyond. Thank you so much for being here and for taking the time to answer all the questions and the demonstration that you showed. We will hopefully get that recipe from you, and then we can drop it in our chat later on this afternoon. We can also send it by email. We'll make it work so everybody has access to it that wants it. And so, yes, thank you so much. What are you gonna do? I know that we aren't supposed to ask any more questions, but what are you gonna do with that big bowl of food you got there?
All right, breakfast, lunch, dinner.
Love it.
Turn it
Love
into a
it.
soup. No, I'm gonna eat some of it when I'm done, and you save the rest for later. This is definitely right here. Any leftover, you could turn it into a soup. Saute some onions, throw it in a pot, add some tomato sauce, and add some liquid, and you got a soup. Some chili flakes is pretty good. But everybody, thank you for your time and attention. I hope I offered some good tools, validated your expertise, and created some helped create some new thought or challenge your perspectives. But ultimately, cook with heart and continue the work you're doing. Please remember to take care of you as well. This work that we do is very difficult, tons of emotional labor. And so I really want to convey that message that despite all the cool, neat things we might share and talk about, you are the most valuable resource in your family, in your community, in your organization. So remember, don't leave yourself out, okay? Love is a verb, and go take care of yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chef. As we transition into our first breakout session, we will just recently drop the agenda link in